Our nation was founded, settled, and built by farmers. From the fields of Pennsylvania to the hills of Tennessee, farmers have always led the way.
When President Trump launched his trade war, farmers across America braced for impact. Billions were lost, crops have been rotting, and family farms have been sold off. But what if the chaos was all a part of the plan? What if, after all of the short-term pain, American farmers could finally come out stronger than ever? This isn't the story you've heard on the news, but it might be one that decides the future of U.S. agriculture. First and foremost, I do just want to say that I am making this video solely to share some of the research that I have been reading and finding over the last couple weeks, because when I first saw the new tariffs that Trump was proposing, I knew that there had to be a deeper meaning as to why, rather than what the mainstream media was showing. So I hope that we can start an open conversation with everything that I share here today. So please feel free to add any other experiences or articles that you have found to keep this conversation going.
Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
All right, so since President Trump was sworn in on January 20th, a trade war has begun between many of the other countries we have been importing from for years. It started with Cambodia, then added Mexico, Canada, and China to the list, and now in April 2025, President Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on China, Mexico, Canada, the EU, and a 10% baseline tax on imported goods from all other countries. This led to immediate retaliatory tariffs from China on U.S. agricultural products, which has resulted in soybean sales dropping 50% week over week, pork exports falling by 72%, reaching some of the lowest levels that we have seen in years, and many other commodities are expected to drop before this year's harvest. With export markets shrinking, farmers facing surplus produce and declining prices, this has pushed many farmers towards financial instability.
2016, the United States lost more than 60,000 factories and millions of jobs. China imposed massive barriers to American farm products. You people know that very well, right? Very well. And engaged in theft of trade secrets from American agribusiness. We racked up nearly $4 trillion in trade deficits in goods with China during those years. And the numbers are absolutely astounding, what's been happening over the last 10 years in particular. But you go back 30 years and you wouldn't even believe it. This was a massive transfer of wealth from the United States to China.
But in order to get a better understanding and get a clear view of the big picture of what is going on here, let's look back at history. For much of American history, particularly from the early 19th century until the mid-20th century, the U.S. pursued protectionist policies using tariffs to shield domestic industries from foreign competition. So to break that down into simplest terms, let's create a theoretical scenario where country A produces beef and country B also produces beef, but they are able to do it at a lower cost because, say, their form of currency does not have the same value as country A. So they can ship in their beef and sell it at a lower cost, thus driving down the market for beef, forcing producers in country A to sell their beef at a lower price in order to compete. This is exactly what has happened in America. I'm a beekeeper, and this has been happening across all agricultural products in America, but I don't want to get off topic. So the U.S. pursuing protectionist policies was aiming to protect us from this exact dilemma. Then came along the Reciprocal Trade Agreement of 1934. This act marked a turning point, giving the administration the authority to negotiate tariff reductions with other countries, thus paving the way for more open trade. But shortly after this, World War II broke out, which disrupted global trade, leading to shortages, black markets, and increased trade barriers. However, it also spurred new trade initiatives like the Marshall Plan, and ultimately led to a more globalized post-war economy. The U.S. benefited significantly from the war, with industrial output soaring and new jobs were created, so the United States became a major advocate for free global trade. So what this did is it eliminated any sort of government-imposed limitations that restricted trade, such as taxes, also known as tariffs, also things like quotas, which would limit the quantity of imported goods, and many countries also established free trade agreements with each other to reduce and eliminate these trade barriers between them. So I thought of a great analogy to kind of help break this down a little bit so it's easier to kind of digest and understand. That's how I try to go through research and try to really pick it apart so that I can understand it from the level that I'm at. And have you ever seen the movie The Hunger Games? It is a great movie about a girl that lives in a dystopia world where after the war, her country was broken up into districts. So she lived in District 12, which was responsible for coal mining, and then there was like District 11, which was responsible for agriculture, District 10, livestock, 9, grain production. You kind of get the picture. Every single district had their own thing that they specialized in and that they were really good at. This is the kind of approach that we have been taking over the last several decades on a global view. Each country has had their strong suit that supplies other countries with things that they might not be able to produce. And you know, this kind of worked there for a minute, except the other countries did not play fair. So free trade assumed that all players would follow similar rules, fair labor standards, environmental protections, and no government cheating. But countries like China, sorry, not trying to pick on you, but countries like China use cheap labor, low standards, heavy government control, and subsidies to undercut American industries. U.S. companies had to compete with countries that didn't play by the same rules. And, well, to be frank with you, we lost. Which then led to America completely gutting its own manufacturing. I'm sure each and every one of you who are watching this video probably have an experience or probably have seen different towns or cities that have been pretty much just abandoned because any of the factories that were in that area were no longer there, leading to less jobs for the people. So people moved out, and now really some of those places could be known as the slums. That happened to Detroit. I am from Michigan, and it used to be an industrial booming area. So companies chased low wages overseas, U.S. factories shut down, and millions of good-paying blue-collar jobs disappeared, especially in small towns and in rural areas. So communities collapsed, even though corporate profits and stock prices soared. But then this is where we started really getting into trouble. America started buying way more from the world than it was selling, leading to what is called a trade deficit. So every year, hundreds of billions of dollars left the U.S. economy, transferring our wealth from our hands into the pockets of other countries. And instead of selling products, America sold land, companies, and debt to foreign buyers to pay the bills. So China rose and, well, broke the system. China became the world's factory, using state power to dominate global markets. They stole technology, manipulated currency, and controlled critical industries. Free trade rules weren't strong enough to stop it, and the US, well, we have been left very, very vulnerable. But I'm not the only one who has said this. In fact, Warren Buffett was actually warning about this in 2003. That's 22 years ago. Like, take a second and let that sink in. He's been saying this for the last 20 years. He was actually talking about it in the 1980s. So this is something that they know has been coming. He titled the article, "America's Growing Trade Deficit is Selling the Nation Out from Under Us. Here's a way to fix the problem, and we need to do it now." He said, "I'm about to deliver a warning regarding the trade deficit, and my reason for putting my money where my mouth has been for so long is that our trade deficit has greatly worsened, to the point that our country's net worth, so to speak, is now being transferred abroad at an alarming rate." So I'm going to read this little excerpt for you because it was really eye-opening to me for what has happened and what has really already been happening since 2003. So he wrote, "A perpetuation of this transfer will lead to major trouble. To understand why, take a wildly fanciful trip with me to two isolated side-by-side islands of equal size, Squanderville and Thriftville. Land is the only capital asset on these islands, and their communities are primitive, needing only food and producing only food. Working 8 hours a day, in fact, each inhabitant can produce enough food to sustain himself or herself, and for a long time, this is how things go along. On each island, everybody works the prescribed 8 hours a day, which means that each society is self-sufficient. Eventually, though, the industrious citizens of Thriftville decide to do some serious saving and investing. They start to work 16 hours a day, and in this mode, they continue to live off the food they produce in 8 hours of work, but begin exporting an equal amount to their one and only trading outlet, Squanderville. The citizens of Squanderville are ecstatic about this turn of events, since they can now live their lives free from toil but eat as well as ever. Oh yes, there's a quid pro quo, but to the squanderers, this seems harmless. All that the thrifts want in exchange for their food is squander bonds, which are denominated naturally into squander bucks. Over time, Thriftville accumulates an enormous amount of these bonds, which at their core represent claim checks on the future output of Squanderville. A few pundits in Squanderville smell trouble coming. They foresee that the squanders, both to eat and to pay off or simply service the debt they're piling up, will eventually require them to work more than 8 hours a day. But the residents of Squanderville are in no mood to listen to such doomsaying. Meanwhile, the citizens of Thriftville begin to get nervous. Just how good, they ask, are the IOUs of a shiftless land? So the thrifts change strategy. Though they continue to hold some bonds, they sell most of them to Squanderville residents for squander bucks and use the proceeds to buy Squanderville land. But eventually, the thrifts own all of Squanderville. At that point, the squanders are forced to deal with an ugly equation. They must now not only return to working 8 hours a day in order to eat, they have nothing left to trade, but most also work additional hours to service their debt and pay Thriftville rent on the land so imprudently sold. In effect, Squanderville has been colonized by purchase rather than conquest. So keeping that in mind, what do you think has happened to America and speaks as to why we're in the pickle today? So let's think in terms of a family. Imagine that I get suppliers of every single thing that I consume. All of my food, my water, my energy, my gas, like everything that I consume. I convince those suppliers to sell to me Emily family IOUs that are payable in goods and services and with interest added by my dependents. To some, this may seem like a fair trade from my family to its creditors, but my children and their children and my children's children's children's, all of the generations after me will most likely not applaud the deal that I sold their life out from under them before they were even born. So back to the tariffs that Trump is proposing. America is living beyond its means, selling off land, businesses, and farms to foreigners and corporations. And we are so far along this road that if we don't fix it, We won't own our country anymore. In fact, we barely even own it now. So in theory, tariffs are supposed to help American farmers by making imported goods more expensive so that American-grown products become more competitive because they're going to be cheaper than any sort of foreign options that come into our country. Protecting U.S. agricultural markets from being flooded with foreign, cheaper crops, which can undercut American farmers' prices. This is something that has happened to the honey markets. They have crashed the honey market for all of us beekeepers, but that's besides the point. Pressuring foreign governments like China to agree to better trade deals that give U.S. farmers more access to overseas markets long term. So tariffs could help in the long run if they force fair trade deals. But in the short term, it's going to be really hard to be a farmer right now. This is why the USDA did just issue out the initial round of aid to farmers called the ECAP, the Emergency Commodity Assistance Program. Farmers will receive payments on a flat per acre rate of 100% for planted acres and 50% where there was prevented planting. So some of the commodities that are included into this, I will just list them up here for you guys to view. Now, that still does leave out many other agricultural producers, but at least it's a start. Farming is the backbone of America, as Trump said himself.
The American farmer embodies the timeless values of America. You believe in hard work and self-reliance.
So if we lose our farms, we lose our future. The question isn't whether tariffs work, it's whether we have the will to endure the storm. So I want to ask you, do you think farmers can survive this storm, and should America protect them at all costs? Tell me in the comments, and thanks for watching.
You follow the rules, obey our laws, and respect our great American flag. You support our communities, raise loving families, teach your children right from wrong, and you are always loyal to this magnificent nation that we so love. Now you have a government that is loyal to you, finally, in return. Because we know that government's first duty is to our own citizens. We are fighting for the American farmer, and we are fighting for the American dream, and for the products made and grown with pride right here in the USA. That's what we're fighting for. We are defending a cherished legacy, and we are preserving a beautiful way of life passed down from mothers and fathers to sons and daughters, from generation to generation. You are the keepers of this noble tradition. You are the guardians of this majestic heritage. We are standing up for the men and women who work the fields, till the soil, and harvest the land. We are protecting your rights, your freedoms, and our glorious Constitution. And we are doing it all with love in our hearts, joy in our souls, and trust in our God.